everyone. Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Racing Line podcast. Men, what an awesome night of racing that we had. Championship performances galore. And we'll start off with the fantastic performance that was displayed at Old Trafford with Liverpool destroying Manchester United 5-0. Devastating.
Did you guys have a secret group chat where you thought you're gonna do that at the start of the pod?
No,
I was unaware of that.
Anthony, have you been sitting on that all day?
I've been sitting on that for you all day, mate. I had to start with that one.
Yeah, I bet you sit on something else too.
Oh, mate, there you go. Mo Salah, mate. Mo Salah getting the lean angle down. All right.
You see that bandwagon going by? I think you're jumping on it, my friend.
Let's get a little bit more serious. We're actually talking about the latest MotoGP race that just took place at Misano, the circuit of Marco Simoncelli, the third last round of the MotoGP World Championship. It was a cold day, obviously, in that part of Italy, and I'll let Michael give us the brief, introduction to the podcast and the few main points from the race.
Yeah, what a weekend of racing it was. I've just watched the MotoGP race, and I've got to say, there's so many storylines in that race that it almost left me without a clear starting point. But I must say that Quartararo, well-deserved champion, the most consistent rider all year. We've had a brave push by Francesco Bagnaia in this second half of the season, but I think Quartararo's consistency has paid off in the end. A great manufacturer battle between Yamaha and Ducati after a rebound season from 2020, and this race was no different from the previous races that have transpired this season, with a lot of lead changes, a lot of drama, and culminating in both Ducati riders falling at the same corner of the track, both with obviously the team decision to run hard front tires, which really was a surprise to me, and I'm sure it was a surprise to most MotoGP fans to see that decision come about. But at the end, it really cost Ducati and it hands Quartararo the title on a silver platter. In terms of the actual race, brilliant to see Marc Marquez back on the winners' step of the podium. Really come along strongly in the last three races, with a second at Motorland in Aragon, and then 2 wins on the bounce. So Marquez is really stepping it up. I think his shoulder looks healed, and he looks really consistent again, which I'll let Joseph make the point later, but I think that it's really going to make next season very interesting. But just in terms of the race, I think there were a few things that stood out to me. The early pace of the Ducatis was one. Bagnaia starting brilliantly, Miller starting brilliantly, and then we see Miller go down. I think it was on lap 6 of the race, at the corner that Bagnaia ends up falling at. I think Quartararo was very poised throughout the race, very poor at the start, not with an ideal start at all, but just gradually made his way through the pack, and then really turned on the jets. Even before Bagnaia fell, he was already moving into the top 6, and then obviously after Bagnaia falls, moving briefly into third before finishing in 4th with the World Championship. So very dramatic race. I think Ducati made 2 unneeded errors. Obviously, the first being the decision to go with the hard front tire. I didn't really understand it, considering that they qualified so well. I don't think they needed to take that risk. I think in the moment, if it pays off, it could have been something, on a warmer day, it could have been something that came into effect later in the race. But you made the point that it was a rather cool track temperature, and that was consistent throughout the weekend. So I didn't really understand the decision, and like I said, it ended up costing them gravely. And I also didn't understand at the point where Bagnaia falls the need for him to push. Only the lap before, I think it was 2 laps before, he actually breaks away from Marquez, so there's no need for him to push. And when he does, he falls, and like I said, it's all over. Bastianini. This guy has come out of nowhere really in the last half of the season. It doesn't surprise me per se because he displayed late race pace all of last season. Anyone following Moto2 would have seen that, particularly his second half of the season, just like this year. He was really finishing the season well, and late in races he would pick up a lot of position. So to go from 16th on the starting grid to fall back to 17th at one point in the early laps, and then to finish in third was just brilliant. And I really think he's making a case now. I think anyway that it was between him and Martin, and I think he's really pushed ahead of Martin just through his consistency in these last three to four races. And then obviously we see Rossi in his farewell Grand Prix in Italy. And just in closing, I think it just poises 2022 so brilliantly. You know, Yamaha will be entering the season as world champions. Ducati with a much improved bike, and surely Martin, Bastianini, and that the stable that they have push the bike further. Suzuki, I believe, will rebound next year when they can finally start to introduce those parts that they were testing in the off season for 2022. I think Honda, obviously with Marquez back to full strength, have finished the season really strongly as well. And then it's natural, I think, to see progression from Aprilia and KTM. So I just think the way it's ended, congratulations to Quartararo, and it just puts us in a really interesting position moving forward in 2022.
And just for anyone who hasn't actually watched the race, just very briefly, the first top four were Marc Marquez, as Mike mentioned earlier, Paul Espargaro, getting by far his best result for Honda in second, Bastianini taking third from Quartararo on the second last corner, and then Quartararo finishing in fourth, and in doing so tying up the championship. And with that, we'll move into the talking points, Joey. So if you want to kick us off there, please go for it.
What's there left? Mike spoke about everything in his flaming 10-minute race preview. He didn't preview the race. No, it's all right. So quickly, the first thing I'd like to pick up on, well, congratulations on Quartararo. What a year. It just proves when you don't fall, that's the way to win championships. I don't think he's fallen this year in a race. So kudos to him. I think it was rather fitting that he won his championship on the day that Rossi had his last race in Italy, since Rossi was such a big person for that Yamaha team for so long. What did you think, Anthony, about the whole championship, other than the fact that I don't think anyone, not even the commentators, were thinking that there was going to be a championship celebration that race, especially after the pace that Ducati had literally all weekend.
It was the biggest surprise. Like, no one was ready for it.
When he actually crashed, I think the commentators took a second and a half to realize that the championship was then and there done, because you hear him go, he goes down, and then they go, wait, that's the championship. I think no one saw that coming.
No, and just to think about the pace that he was showing, before him, it's almost like he had just broken Marquez the two previous laps before that, and I kind of thought, well, he can't have done anything more to extend the championship. It was awesome. He raced awesome. Bagnaia for the whole race, didn't put a foot wrong. I think we might have a bit of a debate about the tyre choice later on, because I don't think I sit on the same side of the fence as you guys. But yeah, just happened too quickly, and I really feel sorry for him. But at the same time, and Harry and I were talking about this off air earlier, I mean, this guy is the best thing to happen to Ducati for quite a long time, and I can't wait to see, what his future trajectory looks like, to be honest with you.
I really feel like this is his Quartararo year last year, where he's sort of learning on the fly. I mean, Quartararo wasn't in the factory team last year, but he was on a factory bike, and I think this is really when Bagnaia sort of had to deal with a bit of pressure, and I think he's done actually pretty well dealing with the pressure. You haven't seen many cracks until now. Touching on the tyres, it was actually really interesting because the day before in qualifying, Miller actually spoke on the podium about how hard it is to get that left tyre to activate at Misano when the track hasn't got temperature. So to put him on a harder tyre that is harder to activate in itself, It was an interesting decision, and the only thing I can think of is that I think Ducati don't trust that their bike can deal with the tires for the whole race, because consistently quite regularly all year they have gone for a harder tire compound than everyone else. We saw it in a couple of races back when Bagnaia chose the hard tires as well. The only thing I can think of is that they don't trust that tire, that their bike can preserve the tires. But also it was interesting listening. Literally the day before, I was listening to one of the British commentators talking about how demanding it is to ride a MotoGP bike, and he was just saying you have to be to ride a MotoGP bike fast. The commitment is I have to be prepared to crash on every corner. And you see that so many times this year. We've just seen bikes that don't show any real like look of falling, just sliding out under people. And I think the only thing that happened to Ducati this week was they didn't have any of those problems until the race, where every other rider seemed to have a few accidents in practice, in qualifying. Bastianini slid off 3 times in qualifying. Marquez had his accidents in qualifying. So probably just a bit of bad luck and bit of a lack of awareness, I suppose, maybe because they didn't have a problem all weekend. But
Touch on that point. I think if anything this year shown that bike is Bagnaia's bike, and I think development in the off season will be primarily based on the feedback he's been giving all year. I think it's interesting though to compare Miller's fall to Bagnaia's fall, because there was a slight difference between them. Bagnaia actually was tipping into that corner much earlier than expected, and I don't know whether that was because he was trying to really push to break away from Marquez even more, if it was just rider error. But needless to say, it's a rider mistake in that situation, and he really, as brilliant as he's been, and I think he's been super consistent this year, which is something that Ducati haven't had for a few years now. It was just, I think, unfortunate that it happened in that pressure moment, and I don't think we might be giving not enough credit to Marquez too, because Marquez raced a really consistent race and kept that pressure. You could see him waiting for that mistake, and I think he, like Anthony said, he had just kind of broken away, and that's when Bagnaia cracks. And I think it's just unfortunate that it happens there and then. But regardless, I think he's had an absolutely brilliant year, and it's been a fantastic year for Ducati as a whole.
The other interesting thing was I saw with that you would expect Miller wasn't even pushing, because you saw him, he actually had a better jump off the line, and once they got to that first corner, you saw him just hold up, let Bagnaia through, and then just follow. So you would expect him to have been doing rather comfortable laps behind Bagnaia, unless Bagnaia was really pushing with pace that he couldn't keep up with. But
I don't think that we can
speculate.
Say that. Speculate that Bagnaia wasn't pushing. I think Marquez, knowing him, would have been, and if you watch the race, he was pushing to try to get past Bagnaia for 15 to 20 laps, and Bagnaia was holding him off. Fantastic. They were really motoring. They were breaking away from the rest of the field.
Same as last race at Misano.
If you looked at Paul Espargaro's times as well, they weren't slouch times. He was, doing quite well in third and pulling away again comfortably himself. So they were moving really quickly. I think just briefly on the tires, I don't think it was a mistake at all. Personally, I think that for Ducati, if we think about everything up to the crash, which we can call rider error, he was comfortably keeping Marquez behind him, for the majority of the race. And then with a handful of laps to go, he, started to push, and Marquez really couldn't stay with him. And I think he might have just pushed for one lap too many, or just a little bit too hard. But had he have stayed on the bike, his tires were giving him by far the best lap time at the end of the race. And I think it's just a shame that he did fall down, because like I said, maybe I said it off air, but I think he would have won that race by, a second and a half had he stayed on. So I think the tires were right. I think he made a mistake. I think Miller made a mistake as well. I don't know if it was the same. I'm kind of sick of making excuses for him, to be honest with you.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point, Anthony. I think the difference between Miller and Bagnaia, and this is not to people think that I don't like Miller. I think Miller made it could have genuinely been the tyres not heated up. That hadn't heated up at the time. But Bagnaia, you could, if he doesn't fall, you can be sitting there saying the hard tyres were a masterstroke and it was the reason why he was pulling away. But at the end of the day, he does. So we'll never know. And I just think that what was the point in risking it? Like, they qualified fine. They had great pace all weekend. I didn't see the point of it. And I didn't understand the point changing that setup on race day when the riders were clearly comfortable with medium hard. So I just didn't understand it.
Are you, Harry? Have you got any thoughts on this matter?
Well, obviously being new, that, the hard tire obviously would be the hardest one to get temperature into. And I think I said to Anthony at the start of before we jumped on the Zoom, that the strategists should have known that the weather was going to be cold and the track wasn't going to get heat into the surface. So why were they putting these riders on the hardest compound, considering they were the only two riders in the whole field that had the hard compound? So I don't know. To me, it didn't make sense, and I feel like, yeah, people are going to point fingers at Bagnaia and Miller, but I feel it's the team that's at fault on this one.
Yeah, it seems like a team decision, and interestingly, in practice, in the
strange
first
team
practice
decision.
session, they were saying that they were expecting warmer temperatures on race day. Clearly, that didn't eventuate, and they must. And I don't, we'll never know if the team still believed that it was going to heat up. But it's still so finicky in a sense, because MotoGP races aren't long. We're not talking about like 2.5 hour races like we see in F1. They're 50 minutes at best. So I can't wrap my head around it. I don't know what the intel was to make that decision. I can't help but think it was a decision made by the team to give them a competitive advantage, obviously. And I think it almost worked, but ultimately it cost them both their bikes and a massive impact on Ducati and the constructors. They went from having a chance for the Triple Crown to now it being firmly in Yamaha's grasp. So it's huge consequences.
I will say just quickly, considering they were on the hard tires, Miller and Bagnaia got off the line really, really quickly, which I find surprising considering they were on the hardest compound. But
Ducati's bike is a rocket.
Fantastic hole shot though, so that's been there all year. I still ask myself if Ducati had performed better at Losail, which they were expected to, because they were blitzing the timing sheets in that opening Grand Prix. How different it would have been in this part of the season. But it's if buts and maybes at this point.
I want to move to probably the man of the moment, not because he came first, but just finally had a really good result, Paul Espogara. And second, yeah, but it was his best result of the year by far. And it was fortuitous that the Ducatis did fall off, but you've got to be there to get second, and his pace was really good. I just want to ask the question, do you think this was more of a Honda result or just a bit of circumstance, or do we actually think that Pole's gelling with the bike? It was a bit cooler, and he likes the cooler, less grippy conditions. He said that before. But what do you think about how Honda's progressing now? That's 2 wins in a row, and probably building a bit of momentum now for the next year, which is eerily dangerous, I feel like, for the rest of the championship.
Well, I think firstly, if there's one thing that we know about Honda, regardless of how poorly they're performing, they're always pretty quick to make changes and pretty quick to improve the bike. I mean, we saw the same thing last year. The bike was pretty bang average last year, and even with Bradle and Alex Marquez, they were able to get a few podiums to finish the year. And did Marquez get a win? I can't remember if it was a win or a second. So they do.
Alex Marquez.
Yeah, did he get a win or was just second? He might have just come second.
He finished the year really poorly. He kept falling.
Regardless, he got a couple of podiums anyway.
Mid-season he was strong.
So they do, make radical changes to the bike. I also think that given COVID lockdown, Pole probably took a little bit more time to, sync with the bike. It's not the easiest bike to ride as well. So I think there's a factor of maybe him just becoming comfortable with the bike now. He's obviously come to a track for the second time. because they raced there, 5 weeks ago. They tested the Honda at Misano the day after the first race. So I think, part of it is him having some kind of affinity with the bike at a
And they
track.
tested this bike as well as the new bike. So it wasn't just a new bike
Yeah.
test, it was a this bike test as
Yeah.
well.
That's right. So I think, that bodes well if we were to think about how they might perform next year. And I also just think that with Marquez, getting fitter, he's able to provide more effective feedback. The better he feels, the better the feedback, the better he can set up the bike. He's the master on that bike. So, any effective intel he can give is going to benefit the other side of the garage as well. So, yeah, I do. I think there's a few factors as to why they're improving.
I feel like they need to improve as well. I feel like it's not like they have to. It's like, this is the biggest budget in MotoGP. This is a team that is happy to spend the biggest budget on riders as well. Like, this is not a team that will sit on its laurels. You know what I mean?
We saw it with Yamaha last year. I mean, Yamaha were nowhere last year in terms of where they finished in the points, but they had won races, and it was just a matter of, they had won the most races, in fact, and it was just a matter of tweaking the bike. And I think, like Anthony was saying, I think it does bode well for Honda, because if we know anything about Pole, it's that I don't necessarily think he's a rider that hugely outperforms his bike, but I feel like when he is comfortable on the bike and when it's set up, for him, he does excel. And we saw that with KTM last year, because, you could say that he built the KTM to what it was, and they had really finished 2020 in a strong position. So it could be a mix of him getting used to the bike, but I feel like that point that Anthony made with Marquez coming back, that feedback into the garage is absolutely crucial. And the bike stabilized massively in the last 5 rounds, and you see the results.
I feel like Pole will be a consistent and really valuable second rider, just like I feel that from going on next year, Jack Miller will have to take that second rider, sort of role in the team 100%. But I'm really happy to see how Honda get a 1-2 number one, because they are the biggest name in the sport. Okay, this is probably the biggest WTF moment of the weekend for me. And not because I wasn't expecting it, but the more I think about it, I'm just like, what is happening here? Darren Binder gets confirmed as the last Yamaha rider next year. I'm just thinking to myself, why? I know there's contracts involved in this, but even watching the Moto2 race from the weekend, I don't know if any of you caught that race, really, really cracking race. And I'm thinking, there are 4 riders in Moto2 and probably another 3 in Moto3 who these riders really show just a bit more of everything to what I've ever seen from Darren Binder. I'm just like, why is he getting this fast track pass? And it's not that if I begrudge him for taking it, because if it's offered to you, of course you're going to take it. And and I don't think that Jake Dixon was the right call either. But wouldn't you look at riders like Fernandez, even Lowe's? Lowe's has been in MotoGP before. If you're going to take someone from a lower level, why not take Lowe's, Fernandez, Aaron Canet, or even Fanardi from Moto3? They've all shown like heaps more upside than Darren Binder's ever shown. Any thoughts on this?
Honestly, I saw
even
it
Leccarona, like, what's happening?
I saw when it happened, I honestly thought this has to be some kind of strategic move by Dorna. And like,
why?
Because
we've got a South African.
I think that they're trying to expand the brand. I think that bringing in riders from different countries does that. Like, I mean, you could even say, look, Remy Gardner, as brilliant as he's been, right? You could very easily make the case that Ralph Fernandez should be on a ride before him.
He's on a ride.
Well, in terms of MotoGP, I think that he could have, I think he could have got a better ride than Gardner. But because I personally think that he's a little bit more of a better racer. And I think the last couple of rounds has shown that Gardner, can be a little bit shaky, even though he's still been good. So when I saw it happen, I thought surely this is some kind of expansion move, or to gain more fan base, more followers. But it was puzzling. I don't understand. I think there's such a dearth of talent in Moto2. If anything, this year has proven that with Marini and Bastianini. and Martin coming through and how excellent they've been. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I kind of have to concur. I think firstly, probably the most interesting fact is that of the best riders in Moto2, most of them are already making the move up to MotoGP next year, which is a good thing. The case can definitely made that Aaron Canet and Augusto Fernandez racing for Mark VDS should be racing in MotoGP well before this guy. But I mean, he's won one race in Moto3. He's performed, he might be coming 6th in the championship. He's done like nothing to really warrant the move up. He's been given the opportunity. And he's a bigger guy. So maybe the fact that he's a bigger, physical specimen might mean that he performs better on the MotoGP bike as opposed to the Moto3 bike. That might be something, but he's got a lot to prove. And I think that going into next year, if he starts binning the bike, I don't think it's going to be a very long stay. The other thing that Michael was saying about, getting more South Africans in the category, yeah, that seems like an interesting idea. Kyalami, is an awesome track. They want to expand the calendar from 18 tracks to 22 tracks over the next couple of years. Putting a race in Africa.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Definitely expands the category. So that might be part of it as well. But listen, rather than hating on him, it might work. Obviously, he's got a brother in MotoGP that he can lean on. There's going to be a few brothers in MotoGP from next year. But yeah, it's a head scratcher. I don't think he really deserves it, but wish him the best of luck, and hopefully he proves us wrong, because if he flames out, it's really not going to be a good look for MotoGP.
Touching on the whole expansion thing, though, you would think that and this is not going to happen because he's already said he wants a factory bike, but you'd think that getting Toprak into MotoGP would be an even bigger growth phenomenon than getting another South African in there, especially considering he has factory Yamaha Tyres #1 and has it looks like he's going to wrap up the World Superbikes Championship #2 next weekend. You would just think that if you're looking for expansion in Dorna, that would be the play. And I don't know, I just think it's a head scratcher. All right.
Yeah, the last World Superbike rider to come and actually do something in MotoGP.
Slow.
But I think the other thing, can't say that Crutchlow exactly lit it up. He was consistent to an extent, but he was pretty good. I don't think he was a race winner. I don't think he ever consistently challenged though. I mean, look, I think Toprak would be a better choice than Binder. I genuinely don't understand the Binder thing. It must be a publicity. For me, it sounds like some kind of publicity stunt. I don't think he warrants a MotoGP bike at all. But, like Ant said, you hope he does well, because it can only bring exposure to the brand. And that's what I think it is. I think it's a brand move by Dorna.
Just to sound off on this whole topic, and we'll move on from it. But the other thing that we need to take into consideration as well is the last time a rider came from World Superbike into MotoGP, Dorna weren't in charge of World Superbike. And now, obviously, over the last couple of years, they've bought it and they're in it. So they have a vested interest to make sure that they've got quality riders racing in World Superbike as well. So I think before they
it's true.
Let Toprak move into World Superbike, I think they probably want to see a little bit from maybe Van der Mark and Redding to make sure that category is in a strong position before they get rid of arguably the greatest talent there.
I think that category is going to be fine, to be honest. And we'll sort of segue into this then. We've got, I think, watching qualifying, we saw how talented Lecuona is on his day, even though he keeps sending it. He keeps sending it. No, he's not. You can't believe it. You can't believe that.
He's a waste. I do believe it. I think he blew a lot of races last year on a really good bike, because the bike was a 3-time race winner. I think he was given he was on a factory bike last year, because they ran 4 factory bikes in 2020 when they entered with Tech 3's first year, and I think he blew his chance. I think he might do all right in World Superbike, but I genuinely think he can't do it with the pressure. That guy, COVID, you could say, ruined his momentum, but what momentum did he have? Yeah, I just don't think he can cut it. And
Yeah.
yesterday's fall proved that even when the pressure's not there, he still can't finish a race. So I think Tech 3 are doing the right thing by cutting him.
I think if we're talking about Binder moving up to MotoGP when he doesn't deserve it, Lecuona was in Moto 2, wasn't really in there long enough and didn't really do enough to warrant moving up to MotoGP. COVID was probably the best thing for him because they raced at a lot of tracks twice, and it still didn't work out too well. But I think
I'm just saying COVID as in he got COVID.
Yeah,
he physically got COVID,
yeah.
missed a few races.
I think at World Superbike with less of a spotlight, it might do him well. I think there's talent there, but again, the jury's out. We just have to wait and see.
Do we think Honda signing him into World Superbike is a contingency plan in case he actually does harness his talent to bring him back in, considering how young he is?
Potentially,
sort of like a Stefan Bradl thing, but to take over from maybe Pole in a couple of years' time, sort of get him in there and just let him hone his craft for a bit of a less spotlight.
Yeah, potentially. I also think that it's also just got to do with the fact that a lot of the talent was already signed down in MotoGP and World Superbike, and he happened to be, without a ride in MotoGP, and they kind of, I don't know. I think Honda World Superbike still has a lot to prove in relation to making decent signings. So
fair enough.
We'll just
all right.
Leave a pin in that one.
All right, and then my last one, because Michael touched on this as well. Remy Gardner dodged a real bullet this weekend in terms of his title defense.
Huge.
Losing the championship mid-race with Fernandez taking the lead, and then Fernandez sending the bike down the road. I mean,
what a horrific accident too. It did not look pleasant.
No, it didn't look pleasant at all. But in terms of I think the only person not helping Fernandez mount a successful championship charge is himself this year, because from the eye test, he seems to be the most talented rider in this field by far, and that's coming from someone who really is happy that Gardner is at the front and wants him to win this championship. But Fernandez looks like the real deal, and my question is, okay, he might not win the championship this year, but moving into MotoGP next year, who do we think? I think he's going to be a really tough opposition for Remy next year.
He will beat Remy next year. He's a better rider.
Are you sure he'll beat him if he keeps sending these bikes down the road? Because MotoGP bikes are harder to stay on than the Moto2 bikes. Come on.
He crashed early in the year. He injured himself. He missed a few races.
Yeah.
It took him a little bit of time to obviously get back into peak physical fitness since he's been there. And to be honest with you, he's not even there yet. But since he's been, somewhat better, he has absolutely destroyed Remy Gardner. And the eye test itself just shows that. I think we're going to have a similar situation almost with like Zarco and Quartararo. Zarco, won 2 championships and moved up into MotoGP, as the Moto2 champion, but Quartararo was always the more talented rider. And I think we might see this with Fernandez as well.
Do we think he'll push more than what the bike can give him?
I think Tech 3 have really signed awesome riders, like two rookies, granted, but if you look at Fernandez, and I think we're forgetting how he started the season pre-injury. He was, I think it was 3 wins on the bounce and a second, something like that. He started the year like a bat out of hell, and he was just unstoppable. No one could touch him, and it was when he got injured that we see Gardner, who was consistent in those early races, but nowhere near Fernandez, really make that championship push. So I think they will only push each other, and I would not be surprised if next year Tech 3 are more successful than the Works bike. I really would not be surprised. Like I said, granted they are 2 rookies and they'll take time to adjust, but by the end of the season, I would not be surprised if they're really pushing the Works riders. Because
I really think this could be the best thing in terms of Tech 3 having that KTM allegiance, because KTM do have probably the best junior program in all of the classes, and we're going to see that next year. Especially
given that KTM reaffirmed, they weren't doing it this year, but they've reaffirmed to commit to 4 bikes again, 4 full factory bikes, even two with Tech 3. I think that's going to be unbelievable. And I think, like I said, those two, given their history, the fact that they're going to be in the same garage, on the same team, I think that can only push Tech 3, but also KTM, in their development hugely. So I'm really excited for that. I think that's going to be unbelievable. But I do think Fernandez, a healthy Fernandez, edges out Gardner for me.
That's all from me.
I think expanding from that point that we're making about Fernandez and Gardner, how good is it for MotoGP as a whole? I mean, we've gone through, well, if you think about it, over the last decade or so, a fairly consistent rider lineup that's definitely aged out now. But when we think about the young Ducati riders that we've seen this year, obviously with a few more coming in next year, as well as the young KTM riders that are coming through as well, MotoGP is looking really strong, and there's a lot of really quick riders. I mean, if we think about Fernandez and what was said earlier, his dominance this year could have been Marquez-like if he hadn't have been injured. Like, I mean that genuinely. He's been phenomenal throughout the whole season, and I think had he have finished this race, he probably could have won the championship by 20 points really. He's just looked that strong recently, so it's unfortunate for him. But in saying that, we kind of have to give Remy Gardner credit as well. He's by no means performed poorly this year. I mean, his consistency, he's only really fallen, at Coda. That's the only real blemish on his resume this year.
He's taken the points that he's been offered.
Consistent podium threat, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that we're probably underselling him a little bit just by how much we're talking up Fernandez. But I think moving into next year, he's going to be on a good bike with a lot of young talent around him, which would be a really good measuring stick to see how he actually rates against the likes of Binder, Oliveira, and obviously Fernandez. But I think, on a whole, it's really good for MotoGP. I mean, we've got young lineups in Yamaha, we've got young lineups in Ducati, young lineups in KTM. And I think the fact that we're seeing, more current spec bikes, which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago after the last race, that these young riders can get on, which definitely wasn't the case, over the last decade.
3 years ago.
Yeah. But even obviously coming out of the recession and things like that, I mean, it's better for these young riders to be getting these rides so they can actually show what they're made of.
I think one more thing to consider too that I keep forgetting is that both Suzuki riders will be in contract years next year, and we've mentioned it before, but I think Alex Rins, if he was to have another year similar to this year, would definitely be on the move. So and historically Suzuki have not been shy in grabbing the next prospect in the prospect pool quickly. They did it with Rins himself, and they definitely did it with Mir. So that's something to look out for next year as we move forward.
There are too many good riders to fill the factory seats at the moment, so there's definitely going to be some poaching. And that's all from me. If you want to wrap this one up, F, go for it, my man.
Yeah, I think that was a great race. Obviously, the championship's over. We've got 2 races to go, and we'll keep bringing you the reviews for the last 2 races. There might be a little bit of a focus more on, what 2002 looks like, and obviously the rider market. 2022. But thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Please, if you're on our socials, give us a share. Give our content a like. If you're not on our socials, being Instagram or Facebook, get on there. It'll take you a second to like and subscribe. On our YouTube, again, likes and subscribes will be greatly appreciated. And if you're listening on one of our podcasting apps, please share with those people around you that you think might be interested as well. And most importantly, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for supporting our podcast. Thanks so much, guys, for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you very much.
See you, boys.
Thanks,